I just wanted to borrow $35 for baby food. But because of a mistake in the phone number, I suddenly found thousands of dollars in my bank account, a bunch of mysterious packages on my porch, and a secret benefactor who knew too much about my life. And all this at a time when I was raising my grandson, whom my own daughter had abandoned with a smile and a suitcase. But let's take it one step at a time. I'll start from the beginning. I never thought my own daughter would betray me this way, not after everything I sacrificed to raise her. But betrayal doesn't usually march through the front door waving a red flag. It slips in disguised as opportunity. And that's exactly how Lena showed up at my little duplex one muggy August afternoon, dragging a suitcase that looked bigger than she was, Milo perched on her hip like an accessory she'd forgotten she had until the last minute. Now don't get me wrong. I adore my grandson. He's got cheeks so round they practically beg to be kissed, eyes the color of storm clouds right before the rain, and a little tuft of hair that sticks straight up no matter how you smooth it down. But the way Lena handed me that baby like she was transferring a library book she'd finished with, well, it about broke me in half. She started with her speech the second she stepped through the door. And when I say speech, I mean rehearsed down to the pauses and hand gestures. I could practically see the cue cards floating over her head. "Mom, it's only a few months," she said, voice syrupy smooth like she was trying to sell me a timeshare. "Marco's been offered this amazing 4-month residency in Lisbon. It's a golden ticket for us. A chance to finally build the life we've been dreaming of." I wanted to ask whose dream included dumping a baby on grandma's doorstep, but I bit my tongue. You learn over the years that biting your tongue saves you from ulcers, even if it doesn't save you from heartache. Lena went on, all smiles and false confidence. "The housing they're giving us won't allow babies. You know how corporate things are, strict rules. But once we're settled, we'll bring Milo over. You'll only have him for a little while. He's easy. He sleeps through the night, barely cries, and you've always said you miss having a little one around." Now, here's the thing. 20 years ago, I did say I missed the sound of little feet in the house after Lena moved out. But at 44, I was spry enough to run up the stairs 2 at a time. At 64, my knees creak like an old rocking chair every time I stand. I work mornings as a school crossing guard. Bright vest, whistle, the whole 9 yards, and evenings at the laundromat, folding other people's underwear while my back hollers at me. My budget is tighter than a jar lid after a man's tried to loosen it. In short, I was not exactly in the market for full-time grandma duty. But then Milo snuggled into me, his little head fitting right into the crook of my arm like it was designed for that very purpose. His fingers latched onto my blouse and his breath puffed against my chest. That was the end of my resolve. A grandmother's heart doesn't stand a chance against a warm baby who thinks she hung the moon. So I nodded, against my better judgment. "All right, but only for 4 months. And you call every day." "Every single day, Lena." "Oh, of course," she chirped. "You'll hardly notice we're gone." Ha! Famous last words. She called the first 3 days. Checked in, asked if Milo was smiling, told me about a cafe with the best pastries in Europe. Then poof. Silence. Calls stopped like someone yanked the cord from the wall. I told myself maybe she was busy adjusting, maybe time zones got confusing, maybe Lisbon didn't have decent phone service, though if I remember right, Portugal's been modern since before Lena was born. Deep down I knew better. I knew she'd handed me her responsibilities and run off to play at being sophisticated. And there I was, rocking Milo in my worn recliner, arthritis aching, bills piling, and wondering how on earth I'd become plan B in my own daughter's life. What gutted me wasn't just the sudden weight of diapers, bottles, and midnight fussing. It was the realization that Lena trusted me enough to leave her child with me, but not enough to tell me the truth. She dressed her abandonment up in pretty words, but I saw it plain. I wasn't a temporary babysitter. I was the safety net she never planned to untangle herself from. And let me tell you, for a woman who spent her whole life priding herself on independence, that stung worse than any ache in my joints. 2 weeks after Lena left, the honeymoon of being grandma in charge had worn off, and reality came at me with the speed of a runaway shopping cart. Milo was strapped to me in the old baby carrier I'd picked up secondhand at a yard sale for $5, and he was letting the entire grocery store know he was hungry. His little lungs may have been small, but goodness, they could rival a church organ. I waddled into the formula aisle, hips aching, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a bad migraine, and stood there staring at the shelves like they were mocking me. Formula, $21 a can. My wallet, $9 a handful of change and an expired coupon for tuna fish. I held the cheapest can in my hands, turning it over like maybe the nutrition label would magically sprout a discount. My fingers ached from arthritis as I clutched that metal tin, and I actually thought for half a second about just putting it in the cart and praying my card wouldn't get declined again. I've been down that road before, and let me tell you, there's nothing more humiliating than a cashier giving you the pity smile while the line behind you grows restless. "Ma'am? You doing all right?" I turned startled, and there was a young cashier with kind eyes and a name tag that read Kira. Sweet thing couldn't have been older than 20. She looked at me like she really wanted to help, and that about undid me right there. I swallowed hard, forced a shaky smile and said, "I'll manage, honey." That was all I could croak out before my voice betrayed me. I walked out empty-handed, Milo wailing against my chest all the way to the parking lot. People glanced at us, some sympathetic, some annoyed. I wanted to shout, "If you think you can do better, here you take him." But of course I didn't. I just kept bouncing him and humming some half-remembered lullaby from when Lena was a baby. Funny how those songs never leave you, even when your memory for car keys and birthdays does. That night, after I finally got Milo settled with the last bottle I'd been stretching thinner than a watered-down soup, I sat on the couch and stared at my phone. My pride and I had been in a decades-long standoff, but it was clear which one was winning now. I opened a message to my neighbor, Ms. Alvarez. She's a retired baker, the kind of woman who always makes too much soup and leaves some on your doorstep without asking. If anyone would understand, it was her. I typed slowly, my arthritic fingers stiff. "I'm sorry to ask, but I'm in a bind. Could I borrow $35 for formula? I can pay you back Friday when my check comes in." My thumb hovered over the send button for what felt like an eternity. Asking for money at 64 years old felt like signing away a piece of my dignity. But Milo was sleeping peacefully in his crib, and I couldn't stand the thought of facing another hungry day. I pressed send, and then I realized I'd sent it to the wrong number. My heart dropped into my shoes. Instead of Miss Alvarez, I'd texted a complete stranger. I wanted to crawl under the couch cushions and never come out. A few moments later, the phone buzzed. The reply read, "You're a fighter." I blinked at it, confused. That didn't sound like Miss Alvarez, who's sweet but formal and whose English is clipped with her native Spanish. No, this sounded American, casual, almost like a pep talk. Before I could puzzle over it, my banking app pinged. My hand shook as I opened it, certain it was some overdraft warning. Instead, staring back at me in bold numbers was a deposit, $12,500. I almost dropped the phone. $12,500. That was more money than I'd seen in one place since my husband's insurance payout decades ago. My heart raced so fast I thought I might need to call 911. I phoned the bank right then, voice quivering. After a maze of button pressing and hold music, I finally got through. The representative told me, "Yes, Mrs. Bell. This is a legitimate transfer from a verified account. Funds are yours." Mine? No, that couldn't be right. Money doesn't just fall from the sky into women like me. And yet, there it was sitting in my account, glowing like a miracle or a trap. The next morning, a ribboned box sat on my stoop like it had been delivered by the Manners Committee. Heavy paper, silver bow tied so crisp I hated to touch it. I brought it in, cleared a space on my tiny kitchen table between the mail and a jar of buttons, and lifted the lid. Inside were folded stacks of soft, organic cotton clothes, onesies the color of tea with too much milk, plus neat towers of the exact formula I'd been pricing the night before. There were a couple of simple toys, too. A wooden rattle shaped like a moon and a cloth book that crinkled when you turned the pages. On top lay a small cream card. "For the fighter who stands alone. You are seen." I read it twice, then a third time, like the meaning might change if I blinked. I checked the label again. No store name, no invoice, no return address. Just my name written in tidy, careful printing. The kind you learn from a patient teacher with good pens. It should have felt like a blessing. Instead, it felt like a secret with a bow. More boxes followed, regular as Sunday. One week brought a set of glass bottles with silicone sleeves, each the color of sherbet. Another week, a fleece blanket embroidered with M in the corner, Milo's initial, in a thread the shade of ripe blueberries. Then came a stroller I'd only ever seen on those glossy parenting blogs. Light frame, butter-smooth wheels, handle that adjusted to my cranky back. Tucked inside the canopy was a receipt, and I nearly fainted right there next to the pothose plant. $1,200. I whispered, Lord preserve us. Then wheeled it around the living room like it was a sports car, while Milo flapped his hands like a tiny conductor. Each package had a note. For the little knight. Because brave days deserve gentle tools. Armor comes in many forms. The phrasing made me smile and squint at the same time. Sweet, yes, but also a tad theatrical, like someone auditioning for Best Benefactor. The neighborhood noticed. Of course they did. Mrs. Whitfield across the way watered her succulents twice as long whenever a delivery truck stopped by, the hose dangling in slow motion while her eyes did arithmetic. She asked, "New baby shower?" And I said, "Ongoing," which was both accurate and useless. Alvarez brought over almond cookies and a raised eyebrow. I shrugged. Guardian angels have good taste, apparently. She patted my arm and told me to say thank you to the air, just in case the air was listening. Then it tilted from kind to curious, and from curious to something that tapped at my nerves. A Navy SUV started appearing on our block. Not every day, but enough for a woman like me, who counts pills and pennies with the same vigilance, to notice patterns. It would idle 2 houses down, engine humming, windows tinted darker than my old church hat. Sometimes it stayed an hour. Sometimes it came and went like it had forgotten something. I told myself it was a rideshare waiting on a fare, or a neighbor's nephew with a mysterious schedule. But both explanations wore thin after the 3rd or 4th visit. I began closing my curtains before dusk, not because I thought anyone could see us plainly, but because I was tired of feeling like a specimen on a stage. One box arrived smaller than the rest, but my hands shook more opening it. Inside lay a wooden charm bracelet, sanded smooth with a single round pendant engraved with an M. Next to it a Polaroid. Me and Milo on the rug at library story time, him gnawing a plastic ring while I made a ridiculous fish face. I remember the librarian reading in her sing-song and the dusty sweet smell of old pages. I do not remember anyone taking a picture. The angle was low, close, almost intimate. Whoever held that camera had been near enough to hear Milo's happy squeals. I sat down flat, right there on the kitchen mat, and pressed the photo to the table as if it might try to wriggle away. A bracelet is a kindness. A candid I didn't notice is something else. I looked at the note tucked underneath, just 3 words this time. Still with you. I breathed in, counted to 7 the way my doctor taught me, let it out slow. Gifts were filling our shelves, lightening the ledger, softening the hard parts of our days. But somewhere, someone knew our routines. What aisle I walked, what corner of the library rug I preferred. The way Milo's initial curled on a blanket. I couldn't decide whether to hang a banner that said thank you or a sign that said please announce yourself. Generosity can feel like a hug. Watch generosity can feel like a hand on your shoulder you didn't invite. And there I was standing between the two, wondering which one I was holding. One morning my phone buzzed with a text that made me grip the kitchen counter. Tomorrow 11 a.m. Arboretum Greenhouse, Koi Pond. Come with Milo. Alone. Now I may be 64, but I wasn't born yesterday. Every warning bell inside me went off like the fire drills at the elementary school where I worked the crosswalk. I stared at that message thinking, this is how women end up in true crime documentaries. But then I looked at the stack of formula tins from the mysterious packages, and at Milo gurgling happily in his secondhand swing. And I thought, if this person really wanted to harm us, why spend hundreds on organic onesies first? Curiosity has gotten me in trouble before. Ask me about the time I tested a hot pepper just to see. And it won out again. The next day, I strapped Milo into his new stroller, the one with wheels smoother than my own knees, and headed to the arboretum. The greenhouse smelled of damp earth and orchids, a place where everything looked lush and expensive, even the moss. The koi pond shimmered in the light like liquid bronze, fat fish gliding in lazy circles. I picked a bench, parked the stroller, and pretended to study a fern with great intensity. That's when I noticed him. An older man in a navy jacket, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses. He approached slowly, both hands visible, like he was auditioning for the role of not a threat. "Mrs. Bell?" he asked gently. "Yes," I said, ready to grab Milo and bolt if necessary. "My name is Elliot Crane." I'm the one who's been sending the packages. Well, that knocked the wind right out of me. He sat a respectful distance away, folded his hands in his lap, and started to explain. His wife June had died 3 years back, pancreatic cancer. Before she passed, she'd made him promise to use their savings, not through a big charity with red tape, but directly personally for families in need. He'd been a radio engineer before retirement, the kind of man who tinkered with wires and antennas in his garage. After June's death, he threw himself into a peculiar project, intercepting missent texts to a local helpline system he'd built. Most of what comes through our pizza orders are wrong numbers, he said. But sometimes you get something real, something that needs answering. That something real had been my desperate text for $35. I sat there with my mouth dry as old toast, listening as he admitted everything. The photographs, the surveillance, the way he checked public records to be sure I wasn't running a scam. I had to know you were real, he said, his eyes behind those glasses full of regret. And you were. More than I expected. You've been raising your grandson with nothing but grit and stubbornness. June would have called you a warrior. I wanted to be angry about the invasion of privacy. I wanted to scold him for making me feel like I was living under a microscope. But instead, I found myself pressing my palm flat against Milo's stroller handle, trying to steady myself for the real reason he'd asked to meet. Because then came the part that made my ears ring. Mrs. Bell, he said carefully, Marco never had a residency in Lisbon. I had someone look into it. Your daughter and her partner are broke. They've been living on credit, moving from hostel to hostel, staging their photos to look like luxury trips. There is no golden opportunity. It was all a lie. I sat there, watching coy mouths open and close like tiny O's, while his words sank in. Part of me wasn't surprised. I'd known in my bones that Lena's story was too polished. But hearing it confirmed by a stranger with files and facts? That was something else entirely. My daughter hadn't just abandoned me with Milo. She'd built her excuses out of smoke and mirrors, and left me holding the only real thing she had, her child. And sitting there by that pond, I realized for the first time that I wasn't just tired. I was betrayed. I spent 3 whole evenings hunched at my kitchen table, glasses perched on my nose, going through the thick packet of information Elliot had given me. Let me tell you, it read less like a respectable financial record, and more like the script of a cautionary tale. There were credit card statements bleeding red with overdraft fees, receipts from dingy hostels that they had somehow turned into luxury apartments on social media, and one bounce check after another like popcorn popping in a pan. It was all there in black and white. My daughter and Marco weren't climbing toward success in Lisbon. They were falling headfirst into debt. And the worst part? While they posed with wine glasses on cobblestone streets, I was cutting my arthritis pills in half and diluting formula just to stretch a can for Milo. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I dialed Lena. She answered after several rings, her voice sugary, like she thought small talk could erase the last 2 months. Mom, how's my little guy? Is he crawling yet? We miss him so much. I didn't even bother with pleasantries. Lena, I've been going through some information. You and Marco are in trouble, aren't you? There was a pause, just long enough to confirm she knew I knew. Then she sighed dramatically, the way she used to when I caught her sneaking cookies before dinner. Mom, we're struggling, okay? Things are a little tight. Could you maybe spot us $3,000? Just for rent and some tickets home? We'll pay you back as soon as we can. $3,000. She asked for it like she was requesting a cup of sugar. My hands clenched the phone so hard I thought it might snap in half. Are you coming back for Milo? I asked, my voice low and steady, though my heart thudded like a drum. Well, she hesitated, and I could practically hear Marco coaching her from the background. He's doing so well with you. You've got the routine down. Maybe it's better if he just stays a while longer. That was it. The last straw, the final drop in a cup already overflowing. Lena, I said, sharper than I'd spoken to her in years. You either come home and be his mother, or you sign guardianship papers so I can protect him. But I am done being your backup plan. She gasped like I had slapped her through the phone. Mom, how can you say that? That's cruel. You've always been so supportive, and now you're threatening to take my son away? Her tears came next. I could hear her choking them out, the way she used to when she wanted me to believe she was the victim of an unfair world instead of the architect of her own mess. Once upon a time, those tears worked on me. They softened my spine, made me dig out my checkbook, made me cover for her mistakes. But this time, all I felt was the hollow echo of disappointment. For the first time in her 30 years, her tears didn't move me 1 inch. I sat at my kitchen table, Milo babbling on the floor beside me, and thought, I may be old, but I'm not a fool anymore. I let her cry. I let her call me cruel. And when she finally went quiet, I said simply, figure out what you want to be, Lena. A tourist or a mother. You can't be both. Then I hung up, my hands trembling, but not from guilt. From resolve. And goodness gracious, that resolve felt better than any medicine I'd ever taken. Life has a funny way of rearranging itself when you're not paying attention. 1 minute, I was scolding myself for even meeting a stranger at the Arboretum, and the next, Elliot was at my kitchen table nearly every afternoon, Milo clapping his hands at the sound of his voice like the man had been born with a built-in baby magnet. It started small. He'd drop by with a bag of groceries, always practical, never flashy. A sack of potatoes, cartons of eggs, sometimes a pie from the bakery with the excuse, it was on sale. It never was, but I let him have his pride. Milo took to him immediately. The first time Elliot leaned down and let Milo wrap his tiny fingers around one of his, I swear I heard a sound come out of that baby that was halfway between a giggle and a song. Elliot wasn't showy with affection, but he had a steadiness about him that filled the air like the smell of fresh bread. One evening, he came by with a bunch of daisies wrapped in brown paper. June always said daisies were honest flowers, he explained, setting them on my counter. No fuss, no pretense. Just cheerful in their simplicity. I put them in my only vase, which was really a tall pickle jar, and couldn't stop smiling every time I walked past. As the weeks rolled by, we found ourselves in front of Judge Romero, signing temporary guardianship papers for Milo. The judge gave me a kind look, the sort people reserve for women who've clearly been through the ringer and are still standing. I walked out clutching those papers like they were armor. For the first time since Lena left, I felt like Milo had something official to protect him. Then came a Tuesday morning that looked ordinary until it wasn't. I was sipping my weak coffee, Milo banging a spoon on his highchair tray like a one-man percussion band, when Elliot reached into his pocket and slid a small velvet box across the table. No speeches, no down-on-one-knee drama. Just a quiet gesture, as if he were handing me the sugar bowl. Inside was a simple gold ring, worn smooth with age. It was my grandmother's, he said softly. She'd be glad to see it passed on. Would you wear it? I nearly spilled my coffee, not because I was shocked we'd grown closer than I expected, but because of the timing. A man who brought daisies and potatoes was now offering me permanence. I slipped it on, and it fit like it had been waiting for me all along. A week later, we stood in the courthouse, Milo perched on my hip in his only collared shirt, while Judge Romero married us in less than 10 minutes. No choir, no aisle, no fuss. Just a simple ceremony that felt truer than any grand affair ever could. Milo cooed halfway through, which we decided counted as his blessing. The whispers from the neighbors, which had once been sharp enough to slice bread, began to soften. Folks stopped speculating about the stream of packages, and instead started commenting on how healthy and happy Milo looked. Even Mrs. Whitfield, queen of side-eye, told me at the mailbox that he was thriving. High praise, considering she once scolded me for leaving my garbage can lid ajar. And the sweetest change came from Ms. Alvarez, who waved me over one afternoon and said, "Bring Elliot and the baby for dinner." I made too much soup again. I knew right then. The three of us weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something new, something sturdy enough to be called a family. Life had finally started to feel steady again when Elliot sat me down one evening after dinner, the table still cluttered with crumbs of cornbread and Milo's half-mashed peas. He folded his hands like he was about to announce the weather. "Nora," he said, "I think it's time we talk about adoption." I looked at him over my glasses. Adoption? Yes. Making Milo legally ours. Not just guardianship that can be challenged, not paperwork that can be undone with a signature. Real permanent security. The words hit me with the weight of a freight train. It wasn't that I hadn't thought about it. I had, during long nights when Milo's soft breathing was the only sound in the house. But hearing Elliot say it aloud like it was possible, like it was the sensible next step, nearly made me cry into my cornbread. Of course, fate has a sense of humor. Just as we began discussing lawyers and paperwork, the phone rang. It was Lena. Mom, guess what? Marco and I finally lined up some work here in Seattle. We've got interviews and a couple of gigs lined up. Things are really turning around. Her voice was too bright, too rehearsed. I could practically hear the shaky scaffolding holding up her optimism. That's good, I said, careful to keep my voice even. And, she added quickly, I want to see Milo. I miss him. Now, a part of me wanted to slam the phone down and let her stew in her self-made mess. But another part, the part that still remembered rocking her when she was colicky, kept me steady. You can visit, I said, but supervised. And Lena, you need to know something. Adoption papers are moving forward. Milo needs permanence, and I won't let him dangle in uncertainty any longer. There was a long silence on her end, then the sound of her catching her breath. You'd do that? I would, I said. I will. That conversation lit a fire in me. Not just to protect Milo, but to protect myself from ever being cornered again by Lena's crocodile tears and Marco's empty promises. And that's when the seed of revenge took root. You see, Lena had built her whole image around that glamorous life she claimed to be living overseas. Her social media was a parade of Paris cafes, wine glasses clinking, plates of food arranged like museum exhibits. What her friends and distant cousins didn't know was that half those photos were staged in rundown Lisbon hostels, their exclusive dinners charged to credit cards screaming for mercy. I had receipts. Literally. Elliot's investigator had gathered them. Timestamps, hotel invoices, bank statements with overdraft fees in bold. Every piece of evidence showed the truth behind the curtain. So I thought, why not let Lena's own lies do the heavy lifting? If she ever tried to fight me legally, if she dared to paint herself as the struggling but earnest young mother, I'd bury her case under the weight of her curated fantasy. Every glamorous picture would be cross-referenced with a bill she never paid. Every toast in a borrowed dress would be stacked against the proof of another bounced check. She wanted to play at being sophisticated? Fine. Let her audience see what it really cost. The idea didn't feel cruel. Felt just. A strange kind of justice that wasn't about punishing her, but about protecting Milo and making sure I never had to explain to a judge why I'd been left holding the bag. Elliot caught me smiling into my tea one evening and raised an eyebrow. What's that look for? Oh, I said lightly, just thinking about how lies don't hold up well in daylight. For the first time in years, I didn't feel cornered. I felt like I had the upper hand, and I wasn't about to let it go. A few weeks later, I was in the living room watching Milo wobble across the rug with that determined little face babies get when they decide gravity won't win today. He let go of the coffee table, stuck his arms out like a tiny scarecrow, and toddled 4 whole steps straight into Elliot's waiting arms. The man's grin stretched wider than the Mississippi, and I clapped so hard my palms stung. Milo squealed like he just conquered Everest, which for his chubby little legs he pretty much had. Right in the middle of our celebration, the phone rang. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but Elliot, still holding Milo high in the air like a trophy, nodded toward it. Might be important, he said. It was Lena. Her voice was softer than I'd heard in months, lacking that rehearsed sparkle she usually wore like cheap perfume. Mom, I know I failed, she said. I just want him to know I love him, even if I can't take care of him. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, and for once I didn't feel the urge to yell or cry or bargain. I just listened, letting her words hang in the air. I didn't gloat out loud, it's not my style, but inside I burned with a strange mix of sorrow and triumph. Because while Lena was busy chasing filters and staging fake lives for strangers on the internet, I was here building something real. Milo was safe. Milo was thriving. His cheeks were plump, his giggle was loud, and his steps were steady. He had a stroller that rolled smoother than my own hips and more toys than I'd ever imagined providing on my pension. And most importantly, he had love, the steady, everyday kind that shows up at 3 in the morning and at 3 in the afternoon, not just when it's convenient. Elliot and I had already started filing the adoption papers. The folder sat on the counter, neatly organized, with sticky notes marking every page that needed signatures. If Lena ever tried to challenge me, If she walked into a courtroom acting like the devoted mother she'd abandoned in practice, I had everything ready. Receipts, photographs, timelines, proof not only of her absence, but of the fantasy she'd built on lies. And oh, the irony! She had curated this glamorous world for her audience, full of Parisian cafes that were actually Lisbon hostels, and candlelit dinners that were bought on maxed-out cards. She'd handed me the weapon without realizing it. If she tried to push, her own glossy posts would unravel her story thread by thread. Sometimes revenge isn't about slamming doors or shouting from rooftops. It isn't about grand gestures or cutting someone off with dramatic flair. Sometimes revenge is quieter, calmer. It's watching the person who betrayed you carry the heavy weight of their own choices until they stumble. It's sitting in the quiet peace of a life rebuilt, knowing you hold the truth while they juggle lies. That evening after I hung up, I joined Elliot and Milo on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky pink and gold, and Milo was babbling nonsense to the cat from next door, who wisely kept her distance. Elliot put his arm around my shoulders and kissed the top of my head, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at ease. Lena had made her choices. I had made mine. And standing there with my little family, I knew which life held more weight, more meaning, more joy. Milo tugged on my sleeve, grinning wide as if he understood it all, and in that moment I thought, sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply choosing better and living well.
Share your thoughts in the comments. If you were in my shoes, would you let Lena back into Milo's life? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.